All right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the second panel during our Indie Fantasy Summer Blitz for 2023. I'm Katherine D. Graham, a USA Today bestselling dark fantasy author, and I'm joined today by a second panel of epic fantasy authors. Not just epic because their books are great, but epic because that's the genre of fantasy they write. We're doing this blitz over the weekend. There's going to be over 15 panels, over 50 different authors coming to talk about their books, coming to read some of those books live for the super brave souls. So make sure to subscribe if you want to catch them all. But on this panel, we're bringing back a couple familiar faces with Jim and Helen, and we've got a couple of new people on to the channel. We've got Darren on, and we've got IQ on. Okay, so why don't we go around for the sake of the new viewers and just talk a little bit about who we are, what kind of epic fantasy we write. Like the last panel, we had some Noble Bright, I think, and we had some, they called it Hope Punk, which was a new term for me. But just sort of what kind of epic fantasy you write and what book or series are you known for? Who wants to go first?
Want me to start?
Yeah.
So I'm Darren Shaw. I'm a sci-fi fantasy author. So I've got two books out: The Engineer, and then a standalone sequel called The Dark Heart of Redemption. So The Engineer is more of a almost slice of life book in the fallen city of Redemption. So it's like a post-apocalyptic for a far future city, and the people that live there really don't understand or know how any of the technology works there. It's a fantastical setting. A lot of people look at it as magic, and they worship the different artifacts and things like that. Other people are trying to use it to gain power, and the engineer, who's the main character, is trying to study it. And then the Dark Heart of Redemption is the standalone sequel for it, which gets more into like a military fantasy and more epic stakes, like world-ending stakes that if the characters don't succeed, there's some major threats that they have to deal with. So I consider this to be more my epic fantasy entry, right?
Yeah, and you're a Spiffbo author this year, right? Which is the self-published fantasy blog off.
Yeah, that's right. So I actually entered The Engineer. I was a semi-finalist with Fantasy Faction in 2018. So that was cool. Thanks. So that was a really awesome experience. And then I just entered The Dark Heart, which I published in last September, into this current Spiffbo, and it's changed quite a bit. You see a lot of interesting things with AI art going on and controversies, and over the past 5 years since I published The Engineer, it's really changed. So that's pretty interesting. And then, aside from writing, I'm also a firefighter, and I work as an engineer.
Wow, thus the science aspect comes into play. And we've got a really mix of Spiffbo and non-Spiffbo authors. I'm sorry, Helen, there was a little bit of a lag. Welcome back, Helen. Tell the people who don't know you who you are.
So I'm Helen Garaway, and I'm based out of the UK, and I am a USA Today bestselling and award-winning fantasy author, and I've written the Sentinels Awaken, my Sentinel series. Like, this isn't going to work, is it? But anyway, they're along the back. So Sentinels Awaken was my first book that I wrote, and I've just published Sentinels Vanish, which is the fifth book, which I published in March. And the last book that will close the series will come out in October, 3 years to the day that I launched my debut novel. So that's really quite exciting. Bittersweet to finish a series, but also nice to have a complete series under my belt, which is quite nice. So I write epic fantasy. I've also got a fantasy romance series on the go. So I've got 2 books out in a fantasy romance Soul Mist series, which is a bit lighter and more has a stronger romance subplot. But I must admit, epic fantasy is where I started and is my first love. And I sort of started writing. I'm a late bloomer, so it's never too late to start. I started writing in 2016. I've always been a voracious reader, but stars aligned and I put pen to paper, and out came 6 books. I must have broke my creative dam, and off I went. And then it was like, what to do with them? I have these 6 books that I really enjoy reading on a computer, but I want to hold a book. So then it was, let's start investigating how to publish a book and what the right editing is. And then I decided to go self-publishing because I didn't want to let go of control. And here we are, like 8 books later, 3 novellas and 3 anthologies, and a USA Today bestselling author. So 3 years has been a very busy year.
Yes, I was going to say Helen's entirely too humble. She's multi-award winning and a huge facet of the indie author community, like reviewing people's books, championing their books, talking about their books nonstop, almost more than she talks about her own books. Jim does something very similar. But Helen has been a great writing friend of mine since I was very, like, starting maybe a year after, because mine's the 2nd year. Helen has been on each Blitz since the very first one that I did. So,
and I keep coming back. It's such fun.
You keep coming back, and your journey just keeps growing, and it's so inspiring to see where you are now versus where you were New Year's in 2022. Like,
I know. I've got 4 audiobooks under my belt now, which is also a whole different world. So, yes, it's interesting stuff. I love it. I just love it. I just wish I'd started earlier, but I think there is a time and a place for everything. And obviously this was the right time for me to get involved. But as I say, it's never too late, which is a good thing.
And Jim, welcome back. Jim has also been on a prior Blitz with me. And as I said, another big champion of indie books, reading and reviewing and sharing. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the books you write?
Yeah, I'm Jim Wilborn. I'm the author of the Katherine Chronicles. Right now, there are 2 books out, one called The Seventh Cadence, and one called Strangers in the Promised Land, which is a in-between book between the first and second book. It's kind of like an epic fantasy adventure, kind of for fans of like Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan, that kind of feel, that traditional like 90s epic fantasy feel, kind of blended with more modern ideas. For me personally, I like to call it science fantasy, but if you were to read it without coming to it from my mindset, it's epic fantasy. It's clearly epic fantasy, but I grew up watching a whole lot of Star Trek and that kind of scientific technobabble and using what you know about the natural world in order to solve your problems. It kind of comes into play in a big way in my book series. Yeah, that's what I write mostly. I'm also a dev editor and I help other people write books. That's a whole lot of fun. I don't really take clients a whole lot because I tend to invest everything of myself into everyone else's books. So it just becomes my own baby. So I can't take on too much of that. I do that. And of course, I do YouTube. I review a whole lot of books. My YouTube channel is mostly about, it's kind of like I'm trying to be, the high school literature teacher that you wish you had, who talked about cool epic fantasy books and not about the books that you got really bored with and really finished reading. So I'm taking that approach. That's not as popular as most BookTube stuff, but I'm doing what I want to do. So
I blame Jim for at least 3 of the books that are sitting on my TBR list right now.
Yeah, so that's basically what I do.
Awesome, and glad to have you. And I want to drop here before we do IQs, because I was thinking about what you said, Jim, about the developmental editing and being busy with everything else. All of these authors' links are in the description box if you're watching on YouTube, so you can go and scroll down and follow all of them. And maybe if Jim gets openings for developmental edits or there's new book news from anybody, you can have him right there on your feed where you follow them. But yeah, IQ, it is so good to meet you. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Ian Malcolm. I run under the name IQ Malcolm because if you Google my actual name, all you find is shirtless pictures of Jeff Goldblum. Not that that's a bad thing. I just want to show up.
It's a great character.
He is phenomenal. Anyway, so I primarily write young and new adult sci-fi and fantasy. Probably best known for my Sparrow duology. And then my foray into epic fantasy is my new book, Church of Thieves. So it's book 1 in a trilogy.
Awesome. And are you a SPIFFO author this year too?
Yep. Yeah. Actually, my book came out the day before the deadline, so it worked out perfectly. I was like, it's meant to be. Yeah. So outside of writing, I teach English and reading to middle schoolers. Well, attempt to teach them. It varies on the day.
So are you like Jim? You give them the books they actually want to read?
Slowly. I work at a very small school, so it's tough to get a lot of new books in the budgets. When I first got there, I think our newest book was from the 1980s. So slowly I've been introducing new books that they seem to like. But for some students, no matter what you give them, they're going to hate the book. You're like, how can you hate this? It's amazing. They're like, ah. But that's just teaching in general.
Takes so much patience to teach. Yes. So I'm super excited. One of the things that I love about doing these panels, as I was telling the people in the first panel today that was also Epic Fantasy, which if you missed and you want to go watch that, it's on the playlist that's devoted especially to this Blitz on my main channel page, but was finding out what journey brought you the indie route, because we always have some readers and maybe some writers who want to become authors who watch these and they're just like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I told the people in the first panel, we've had in past Blitzes people who were traditionally published who left to go indie. We've had authors who started indie and went traditional, like Rosalind Breyer, who was in the Realm of Darkness set with Helen and I. And we've had people who are hybrids, who do a little bit of both. So tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you end up going the indie route? Helen, you want to kick us off?
Yep, I can do. So, as I said, I sort of started writing in 2016, and then I had all these books, and it was really, for me, it was like I wanted to read it as a book myself. And so I started researching traditional versus self-publishing, and obviously I was involved with quite a few writing groups, so it was looking to see what people were saying and thinking. And the more I researched, the more I realized I did not want to let go of control of my books. That was the key reason for me. Was I loved my Sentinel series. I really wrote it for me because it's what I love reading, sort of that David Eddings Belgarian sort of world of quests and chosen ones and things. And it's just a sort of fantasy that I loved, and I didn't want somebody else telling me how to write it or change it, or change my characters, or even make me write it to fit someone else's mold. So once I sort of made that decision, I then really went in deep into how do you self-publish, and actually how do I edit, and what do I need to know about editing. I wrote instinctively to begin with, and then sort of back engineered into the structure of the book and how you're supposed to write, and learnt really that it is a craft. You need to learn the craft. You need to understand the structure and what readers expect. And having read so much, I instinctively had an idea of what I would expect in a book. So I hit all the points. So it was really just cleaning it up, tightening it up, and making sure that I had a professional edit. And I did do a development edit for my first two books because I didn't know what I didn't know. So I did invest most in the first two and make sure that I was on the right path, and that you subconsciously write in certain ways that you don't realize you're doing, and until you get somebody external to come and have a look and point out what you're doing, or what your crutch word were, or what your subconscious prejudices are, you don't see them. So you really do need, I would highly recommend that certainly for your first book, you have your dev edit and get an external deep dive to make sure you're on the right track. But that's basically why I went self-publishing, and that's all I've ever done. I've only ever been self-publishing, and I've just come back actually from the Mark Dawson self-publishing show live in London the last couple of days, and they were saying this is the best time to be an indie author. The indie authors, they were doing reviewed quite a lot of research that both Mark Dawson and the Alliance of Independent Authors did versus what Society of Authors did for traditional publish. And traditional revenues are going down, indie authors going up. So we're in the right place, doing the right thing. So that's good news.
Absolutely. I second, even as a developmental editor, I have had my books developmentally edited. Maybe not the novellas, but like the full-length novels. Because I feel like when you're too close to the book, sometimes you don't see what you've missed. I don't know if Jim, that's the same with you or not.
Yeah.
But Darren, how did you end up going this route? You're new, so we don't know anything about your story.
Yep. So I've actually I published my first book in I think it was 2017. I'm I guess for me, it's twofold. My first book, The Engineer, is a very personal story to me. So I've tried to write books a bunch of different times and really kind of lost interest in the story. But that one was so personal that it really drove me to write the whole thing. And the reason it was personal was it's the true story of how I met my wife. She created a game called Redemption Mush, which was a text-based role-playing game online. And I created a character there, and we had some epic adventures there that were story worthy. And I wanted to really put them to paper and tell them because they were just amazing, the stories that we created together. And that was how we met. We eventually then met in person and got married and have a kid now. So it's pretty awesome. So when I wrote that book, I did research a lot of traditional publishing and querying agents and what it meant, and the fact that they wanted books written to market, and that sometimes they would ask you to change main characters and things like that. And to me, it was just such a personal thing that I was like, I don't want to give up that creative control. So same as you, Helen. It was, I wanted full creative control over those characters because it was such a personal story to me. And then, Dark Heart being a standalone kind of sequel to that, it has the same characters. So I didn't even consider traditionally pitching it or anything like that. Not to say that I wouldn't consider it, especially if I wrote something that I felt like would, I wouldn't mind as much changing it or changing aspects of it. I think I could consider that in the future. But just having that length of creative control or that extent of creative control is just awesome. You just put elements in that you want, and and also to write a story that isn't completely traditional, like doesn't have the traditional arc that everybody expects, or the tropes that people are looking for, something that readers can read that's a little bit different, right? So like for mine, having the engineer and the engineering perspective into solving problems and things like that, and as opposed to a normal fictional character, was important to me. And then the other reason is I'm a very slow writer, so I've actually been writing seriously, I would say, since 2014, so about 9 years. My first book took me about 3 years to write, and then my second took me about 5, and that's a long project, and it took me a while to really wrap my head around how long that type of a project is going to be. It was just a 5-year-long writing project is just tremendous. And I always tell people, hey, I want to write a book. They'll tell me, it's cool that you wrote one. I've always wanted to write one. And I tell them, just set aside a little bit of time each week to write, and be consistent about it. And if you do that, you're eventually going to have a novel. And that's, I'm a testament to that. I did that twice with novels, and eventually you have a finished product. You just need to set that time aside to write, even if you don't have a lot of time. So doing that, I think, was another reason that I wanted to be self-published, because I couldn't imagine spending 5 years on a book and then trying to query it for another 3 years. It was just, no, I need to have this out there. So that was a compelling reason for me to stick with self-publishing as well.
I love that you hit the nail on the head as far as some books do better going certain routes. And part of my day job as an editor is also as a pitch coach. And so for the last few years, I've worked to help other authors who wanted to go traditional get signed by agents, get signed by presses. And one of the hardest parts of my job is being honest with an author and telling them right now, based on the market, based on what you want out of your book, indie is a better fit for your book when they dream of going traditional. And some books really do shine so much better in the indie market, especially when it's like niche, or in our case, Helen's and yours and mine too, with The Vow That Twisted Fate. It was a very personal story. I was not willing to change it just to make it more whatever the market was looking for at that time. So I decided to keep it indie, but I haven't closed the door for other series necessarily. Just
there's more of a artistic, I guess, you could get more artistic with the type of book that you have and have different elements that you wouldn't normally have, right? When you have that creative control and you're not writing to market. Which isn't to say it is a good idea to write to market, right? You could sell more, but some aspects you might want to keep unique.
Well, some books you write to sell, and some books you write because you just have to write them.
Yeah.
But you can
They
still
need
be
to be written.
successful as an indie. I've got my 5 Sentinel books. All 5 are in the top 27 of the classic fantasy on Kindle. So I thought top 30, but they're in the top 27, all 5 of them. So you know, if you just get yourself in the right categories, and you know how many books you need to be pushing every day, you can start getting up those rankings.
Yeah, and I think I broke 1,000 sales for the engineer. So, you know, it's doable.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah.
But
you remember, it's hard work. You know, if you want to make something of it, you have to be behind your book and be pushing it all the time.
We have an ability to connect with readers that's harder, I think, in some aspects when you have gatekeepers and be out there and personal. But IQ, you're another person who's new to panels that I lead. So the viewers might not know your story. What brought you the indie route?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, getting over a little cold here. So I've always been someone who, when I started taking my writing career seriously, my goal has always been to be a hybrid author. So the first time I ever wanted to write a book was back in college. I came home, was really excited, told one of my close family friends about it, and he was like, "You can never write a book. Like, who are you kidding?" So unfortunately, that like knocked me out. Yep, I know. Boo. Love the guy, but boo as well.
Wrong.
Anyway, so it took me like another 5 years before I actually attempted to do it. I was kind of in this dead end job, not sure what I wanted to do. So I was like, why not give it a shot? So I started listening to a bunch of podcasts. I got into the Dead Robot Society. So if you haven't checked them out, they're an amazing group of guys. So I started trying to write, found out that I actually loved it. I didn't feel as though it was at a level to try to do traditional publishing, but I knew that it wasn't something I wanted to keep to myself either. So indie was just the best route. So I view this kind of as a way to like improve my skills until, well, now I feel like as though I'm ready for that level.
Awesome. Sorry, there was a little bit of a lag there on my end for a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, so now you're here and you got your book out. And have you made your friend read it?
No. I mean, he was a former boss of mine. So my hometown is like 7 hours away from me. So I'm not going to drive up there and just be like, read my book. You got to
send him a signed copy in the mail.
Nah.
I told you so.
Nah. I got better things to do with my time.
Yeah. Jim, so I know you've been on before, you've shared a little bit of your story before, but I know there's going to be new viewers. So why don't you let us know how you ended up getting into the indie and all of this stuff?
Yeah, so before I started writing to publish, I wrote a bunch in middle school and high school. But between that and now, I did music for a long time. I was in a band, a bunch of stinky guys in a van, driving around, playing gigs, getting underpaid. It was the best. And I was indie that whole time. You know what I mean? I was never signed to a record label. At a certain point, I started pushing for that. But then I saw so many bands kind of get ripped off or get the wrong contract, or even if they got a good contract, they would get this advance and they couldn't pay it back, and then they'd end up owing the label money, or the label didn't do much for them. And, they got such a small royalty rate. The only way they could make money was to constantly tour. Then I got married and had a son, and I was like, well, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to be on the road all the time. I need to find something else to do with my creativity. And I went back to writing. And so I started practicing writing like IQ. I did a whole lot of podcasts, read a whole lot of books. I basically treated it like I was getting an MFA by myself without any professional. I just went really hard into learning and practicing because I wanted to be very good at it before I published. And I started looking at the process of querying and everything. And then I caught wind of a podcast, and it was about self-publishing, and I started listening to that. It literally took me like all of maybe an hour to figure out. It's like, oh no, all that current stuff is done. Like, indie is what I do. You know, I did that before. It just seemed like a natural fit for me. I'm a little more entrepreneurial like that. And I kind of, I don't know, I kind of like the control. I like, you know, getting more of a cut for something that's already really low paid. If you guys don't know, anyone watching, authors don't tend to make a lot of money. So, you know, we often have other day jobs. And if we don't have day jobs, you know, sometimes we're doing other things on the side to help, you know, keep this thing going. It's actually kind of rare to have a full-time author career now. The game is different. It just is. And so I just thought that was the best chance for me. So that's kind of the way I started. I worked for a small indie publisher for a little while before I broke free and did my own thing. They gave me a very big education on publishing and what happens in the background. And that, I'm very grateful for that. But then I wanted to do my own thing, and I branched out, and that's what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. I think you touched on something really, really big there, Jim, for people who are writing and they're like considering getting into this. There's this misconception with you get more royalties of what you sell when you're indie. So I'm going indie because I want to make more money. Where really you're also in charge of investing in your own covers, your own editing, your own marketing. That stuff's going to take some of your money. And like Helen said, you can definitely get to be successful, but it takes patience and time. And you're probably, unless you happen to be a lightning striker, not going to get that on your first book. So a lot of us do support ourselves with day jobs and stuff.
Yeah.
And often it's good for it not to be your first book, quite honestly, because then where do they go from there? You know, it's actually okay for you not to strike gold on your first book. Let it be your fifth book, you know, that's perfectly fine. Then they can go and buy 5 books, and that's way better.
Yeah.
So
I think you have to decide what your objective of writing is. You know, to begin with, I was just writing for the fun of it. It was just something that I really enjoyed, and I'm quite passionate about it now. And the more I've written, the more I want to write, and I have so many ideas now that I just want to keep writing. But there's then that conscious decision that I wanted to publish my book, which is completely different to just writing a book. I mean, you could write one and it's a major achievement, whoever writes the book, but then you make a conscious decision that you want to publish it. And then you're going to put that out into the world, and people are going to look at it and critique it. So now you've got to think about how to make sure that you put the best version of your book out into the world. And then that's where all the hard work begins, and that's where your costs start. So you can write for fun and just love it, but you know, if you're going to publish it, you need to invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually have a similar thing now, because after I switched from music to writing, now all my music is just for fun. I don't publish any of it. I have songs on my hard drive that I just write when I feel the inspiration to write something, and I compose it and I record it myself, and I send it to a few friends, and that's all. And it's just fun now. But the writing I take a little more seriously. So
yeah. And the wheel has popped up, which means we have hit the 30-minute mark. For those who've watched the last few years worth of Blitz, you know that the wheel is new. And so forgive me if this is a tad laggy, but I'm going to try to smooth this out as the weekend goes on. But we have loaded a bunch of different interesting story-related questions into this wheel. And the wheel's going to pick one, and everybody on the panel is going to give their answer for their book. So everybody ready for a spin?
Yep. Let's do it.
yeah.
Right, let's spin it. Oh, I see an antagonist.
You.
Your antagonist's biggest regret at the beginning of the story is...
Goodness.
Let me think.
The trouble is, my antagonist isn't clear at the beginning of the story, and I don't want to give spoilers.
Yep.
Hold on. I'm gonna come up with this. I need like 5 seconds. Let's see here.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I got it.
Yeah, Jim, take it away.
Yeah, I'll give you guys time to pull something together here. You know.
I got to look in my book.
Pardon Darren while he rereads his book real quick.
So in my book 1, my antagonist is kind of like a sub boss. You know, he's not the big bad. You know, we don't get to him for a little while. We got to get through the mini bosses first. And so my mini boss, his probably biggest regret is that he wasn't there for his father when the protagonist of that time, you know, fought and defeated him, because he could have helped. And you know, that's something that sticks with him. You know, when he finally encounters the protagonist of at least of his storyline, the more direct protagonist for him, or I guess antagonist from his perspective. You know, he's just seething and he just can't. It's very personal for him. On top of it being, you know, a combination of geopolitical and pseudo-religious kind of affair. You know, it's also very personal for him, and he just hates the guy. He's never met him, but he hates him. You know, so.
I suppose in mine, I mean, one of the antagonists, I suppose, is the Crown Prince, he's the one that's vying to take over the throne and dethrone his father. And I guess one of his regrets, as it goes on, is that he allowed his wife to talk him into jumping the gun, as it is. I always think of it like Macbeth, and his wife was the one wringing her hands behind him, saying, you know, you've got to do this, you know, your time is now. Whereas he was the Crown Prince anyway, he would be king in time, but he's made this move too early. So I think that's probably one of the things that he, as the book progresses, regrets, that he's allowed her to influence him when it was already his, if he'd just had the patience.
Wow. Makes me actually sort of like your antagonist a little more, Helen.
So mine's kind of tricky, as so my story takes place within this Church of Thieves, and a murder has occurred that's tied to someone trying to overthrow the kingdom. So it's kind of hard to do this without giving away spoilers, but if I had to say their biggest regrets would just be joining the church in the first place. There's stuff that ties back to their childhood, which I can't get into without making things obvious in the book. So that's unfortunately the best I can do for this question.
But that's still really intriguing that, you know, they regretted joining in the first place. That makes us wonder, would they have ever ended up a villain if they hadn't?
Probably not.
So mine's pretty complicated too. I guess I like to have multiple antagonists and kind of conflicting motivations with them. So there's a few different antagonizing things going on in Dark Heart of Redemption. The beginning of it, there's this big siege of Pyramid, which you could kind of see, I guess, up here in the background there in my novel cover. It's this neutral center of redemption, and because it's besieged, it's threatening all civilization, right? So they, you know, the main characters, Actaeon and Assandra. Actaeon's the engineer from the first book, and Assandra's this knight arbiter that has become, she's now the leader of a whole dominion, and they're both trying to work together to fight this force that's come from outside of the city to try to besiege, you know, the civilization that they built. And as it turns out, there's kind of multiple factors to that. One of them is there's some ancients left behind, right? So that when the city fell, the ancients kind of disappeared without a trace. And we learned that there's maybe some of them that still kind of play a role in what's going on and are influencing things. And there are also these creatures called the Starborn, and nobody's really sure what they are at this point. But they're somehow involved with everything. And they manipulate a lot of events, and as you know, the characters come to find out in the book that they can control people's minds, which becomes a huge challenge in the book. So they've created a lot of the events that come to take place, and probably their biggest regret is that Asandra, the you know, who was my wife's character in the game, she was this knight arbiter, but like I said, she becomes the leader of this dominion called Raydell, and we find out that they've manipulated some of the politics historically in all of these dominions to kind of get the outcomes that they want. And with her in charge, for some reason, they can't control her. And that's a big threat for them. So their biggest regret is probably that events led in a certain direction to allow her to come to power. And that's a big issue. So if I were to say at the beginning of the Dark Heart of Redemption, their biggest regret is her coming into power instead of just being where they want her to be.
I love all these. all these I have a thing too for a good, relatable antagonist. Like, even if I don't agree with them, and the Vow That Twisted Fate, which is the epic one that I have, it's the least dark of all my books. Really, the main character and the antagonist, the whole purpose of their story is to really ask what is evil and who gets to decide. But the antagonist within the book, the sorceress, I think her biggest regret is pushing to find out who she was as a child from her parents, because when she hears the answer, she can't accept it. And that's what causes her to leave home. And that's what causes her to turn her back on all her values and everything, because she doesn't want to accept what she is and who she is. And I haven't said this, but I've been working on a prequel sort of on the side for it, but it's from her POV because I love her so much. But that was probably the most heart-wrenching thing, is just seeing her looking back as an adult going, why did I want to know so badly to push to this point? But yeah, so a lot of good stuff in everybody's books. I'm super excited. So why don't we end this off by letting people know what we have coming for the rest of 2023, whether that's events or books that are coming out or other projects like Jim. I know you're YouTubing and doing all these other things. And again, for people who've joined since we started, everybody's links are in the description box if you'd like to follow them or pick up their books. But what have you got going for the second half of 2023?
I can jump in here. Book-wise, not a whole heck of a lot. My wife and I are expecting our first child, so getting ready for that.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you. I had the easy part there. In terms of writing, I'm currently working on the sequel to Church of Thieves, which is Trial of Saints. So I want to get that finished this calendar year so it can come out next year.
Cool title.
Oh, thanks.
Definitely.
Nice.
For me, as Katherine said, basically, I'm doing a whole lot of YouTube videos coming up. We'll say that's not procrastinating, doing the hard work. And I want to say that is because I actually have to do a lot of scripting. I do a lot of research for my videos and stuff. So we'll call that not procrastinating. Let's call it that. But so I have those. They're coming out, usually bi-weekly. They might start to pick up a little bit as I do some more that are a little easier to tackle. But aside from that, I have
hiring one librarian.
Right. Besides that, you can read my books. I have a free book, short story available on my website if you want to grab it, if you want a easy entry in. The next book in my series probably won't be out for at least another year. I am working on that currently between doing the YouTube stuff. But once I get ahead enough in YouTube, I'm just gonna, just really dive into the book. I've been doing a lot of story doctoring with it before I pass it on to a dev editor who's gonna look at it before I get too far and say, yeah, maybe you should change this. This is going in a direction I don't think you should go in. But yeah, so that's coming. And before that, I'm doing a little anthology. I think it's called The Advent of Winter, with a bunch of indie authors. We're basically doing an advent calendar of short stories based on winter and holiday themes, that you'll get one every day leading up to Christmas Day. And that one's going to be a lot of fun. And then after that, it's going to get packaged up and sent as a really nice hardcover edition. Ooh. So I turned that in a couple weeks ago, and I'm really excited about the story that I came up with. It takes place in my world of the Continual Chronicles. It's a little corner that you wouldn't get to see otherwise. So I'm kind of glad I got to explore that. So
awesome. Darren, Helen, what have you got coming up for the rest of the year?
Well, I have obviously book 6 of the Sentinel series is currently with the editor. I get that back July 6th, so then it'll be into the final editing, and then that will launch October 11th, which I said is the 3-year anniversary of launching the first book, which is really quite exciting. And sorry, Alfie's determined to come and get his time on the camera. And then I've also just released a short story in an M&M fantasy anthology called Men of Magic and Myth. And I think the more confident I've become with writing, the more diverse I've become also with my writing. So I'm bringing in more and more diverse characters, which is really quite fun and exciting as well, because it gives you that additional depth in your book. So I've actually written an MM fantasy, which is going to be a lead in to a new epic fantasy, which will have a lot more diverse characters, but that's a completely separate fantasy series. And then I'm writing book 3 of the Soul Mist series. So I was intending to write the Soul Mist as originally it was a duology, and my editor said I had to break the first book into 2, so that made it a trilogy. And now I'm writing the 3rd book. I'm thinking I'm not going to finish it in the 3rd book, so it might actually just be a series. So I'm glad I called it a series and not a trilogy. So there's a 3rd book of that, and there are other ideas bubbling. It's just constant. So there are lots of more series coming, and I have another epic fantasy that I've got a character. When you have a character that just yells at you until you write it down, and you just have to write their backstory down. So I'm plotting his story, and I've got a tentative title for it, but I'm just not going to say it because it'll probably change by the time we get there. But so I have about 3 different series on the go. So, and I work, so this is all outside of working. So so I'm a full-time worker as well, but I love it. So it's just
running your feet off.
We are. We're always writing something.
Yeah.
So like I told you earlier, I'm a very slow writer. So what I decided after I released my 2nd novel was to actually get into a lot of short stories. So I'm a very slow writer, but I'm very quick to come up with ideas. So I've got this whole backlist of ideas that's, I'm looking at it. I'm like, wow, this is an impossible task. So I wanted to write some short stories to really get something out a little faster and, have a little bit of a change of pace where I could publish something more quickly than a full-length novel. And also maybe get some, I write, my 2 novels are both over 600 pages. So attracting readers to that can be intimidating. Sometimes they look at that and go, do I really want to get into that big length of a thing? So having a few short stories out there, I think for me would be a good option to get, some readers maybe interested in picking up a full-length novel from me. So I have 2 planned. One of them is a group of short stories that just take place in Redemption, which you could see there's a snapshot of it behind me. And it's pretty cool because, again, like Helen was saying, it allows you to explore different characters. So a lot of different character ideas instead of just the main characters in my novels, and also some aspects of the world around. So I really get to, Steve, good point. Short fiction's interesting. I've written, before I wrote my 2 novels, I wrote 2 short stories. I had one of them published, and it's a different challenge to write to length, right? And to really think about, with a novel, they say every scene should have a purpose, right? And that's true. But with a short story, it's like every sentence needs to have a purpose. You can't have any sentences that don't have a reason, or else you're going to exceed the word count. So if you really want to keep that short story length, It's an interesting writing exercise that I think really improves your main writing and really keeps it more on key and on track. So I'm doing that with stories around redemption. And then I also came up with an idea to my main character in The Engineer, and one of my main characters in Dark Art is an engineer. And I always refer to him as kind of a medieval MacGyver. So those of you that have watched MacGyver, he always gets into these situations and then he's got to invent a solution out of it, often with just stuff he finds around him or things he's carrying with him, the duct tape and the Swiss Army knife. So Actaeon's that type of character. He's got to MacGyver his way out of like these action, very tense scenes, and he's not the best fighter. He's got to really think his way out of things instead of battling his way. So I wanted to do something a little bit different with him, and I got the idea to pair him with a different character who is a knight investigator that works with the Knight Arbiters, which Cassandra comes from in the main books. And medieval MacGyver is a lot of fun to write. So Actaeon actually works with this character that's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes investigator character that solves mysteries around redemption and allows me to tell some stories. If you've read the Sherlock Holmes short stories, he gets to tell some really interesting stories where it's more about what happened with the inciting incident and less about the characters. But the characters can be very entertaining to read too. So, there's an interesting dynamic with the short stories where I've got this really smart engineer on one hand, and then a really smart, Sherlock Holmes type character working with him, and they have different skill sets. And the investigator character will bring him in when he really needs help. So those have been a lot of fun to start to write, and I think potentially the most enjoyable stories that I've been able to write so far. So I'm looking forward to releasing that eventually. Probably not this year, but maybe sometime next year, depending on how fast I can get these stories down.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear how it all turns out. We got a lot going on across the board on this panel. Thank you all so much for joining today and chatting with us and sharing your stories and your books. This has been great.
Thank you for putting this together. Yeah. And nice meeting everyone.
Indeed, yes.
And it is so my pleasure. For those who are new and don't know what's going on, this is a Blitz. There are 13, 14 more of these panels over the next 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Sunday. So subscribe and come back. In about 40 minutes, I will be back with the first live read panel. And these brave souls are going to be reading excerpts from their book.
I'm doing that tomorrow.
Yes, Helen's coming back. And Darren, I think, is coming back too. So,
I'm reading mine in 40 minutes, right?
Yeah, so you can come back. You can tune in. You can see which of these books you would like to grab. A lot of them are on sale for 99 cents or even free. Like Jim said, you can grab a book free. So definitely give the authors a follow because there are some amazing books represented on the panels this year. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.